were actually a time when Buick made very cool cars, such as the 1963 Buick Riviera with its beautiful body lines and front indicators that look like awesome sideburns. And then you have the 1975 Skyhawk, which was essentially just a better looking AMC Pacer. And then last but not least, the 1970 Buick GSX with a 7.4 liter V8 and 360 horsepower wrapped in a proper muscle car proportions. You can't really go wrong with that. Then as the 80s and the 90s came along, Buick design looked extremely uninspiring, not to mention the early 2000s, which is just a gray zone and a dead zone of bad designs, not just when it comes to Buick, but pretty much the entire car industry. And they never really got back to the glory days. However, there was one 1980s model that stood out like a pro athlete in an amateur league, and that was, of course, the 1987 Buick Grand National. It had this cool, sort of indifferent face that looked like it's ready to cruise down South Beach any time of the day and look right at home. Whether it be going down Ocean Drive on a hot summer's day or keeping it stealthy with a night drive through downtown Miami, the all-black 1987 Buick Grand National is the car that you should do that in. And in this video, I'm gonna take the 1987 Buick Grand National and redesign it into a modern version of itself. So let me show you exactly what I mean. Here it is. The 1987 all black, of course, which is the trademark for the 1987 Grand National. I love that it's all black, just like the 1996 Chevy Impala as well, which later, after 1996, turned into kind of crap. Now we're talking about the Grand National here, so what I want to do is to basically turn it into a modern version of itself. I love the proportions of this boxy car here. It has very cool proportions, and this, as I'm gonna talk about later, is a serious performance car when it comes to the numbers and the quarter mile and so on. I'm gonna talk about that when we go into the redesign. Right now, I want to talk about the design and what's going to be done to it. I'm going to keep this greenhouse here pretty much going to be almost like a resto mod of this car. If we change too much, we're gonna lose the coolness of what makes a Grand National a Grand National. And to me, that is this greenhouse right here, which is a coupe style, and then you have the very boxy, typical 1980s design here, but we need to remove this bumper here. We can't have it be sticking out like this. And there is Harold checking out my air humidifier. He's gonna probably pop back in this video, throughout the video. We need to cut the bumper and lower the part here as well, the whole front end, because we can't have this kind of air intake rushing under the car here. We can have this open field of air that might lift the car, and then we have a problem with safety because the rear end is going to take a lift, just like the Audi TTs, the first generation. If you remember, it came out with a very sleek rear end, and it didn't have anything to push the rear down, and there was a lot of bad accidents with the first generation Audi TT, and that's why they put the tiny little lip on the rear end, which totally changed the driving characteristics of the Audi TT and probably saved a lot of lives too. But that's a whole different story. That's why we want to reach down with the front end here with the Grand National. Same on the sides here. I love these wheels. They are so period correct, but at the same time, we can't really have these wheels if we're going to have a modern version of this car. So we're gonna have to change those. There are a specific style of GNX wheels that I kind of want to put on here and see how that would turn out if we make them a little bigger, a little, maybe not wider, because this is a fat tire for the 80s. Might just be able to keep this tire. That would be probably a first on this channel where I don't widen the rear tire. We have the side mirror here, which looks pretty modern. I think we can make it modern by just making it a little bigger like this, stretch out the design of that, maybe have one line that maybe stretches, something like this. And these have to go, these are two 80s. We can't really make them into modern counterparts of this specific design, so I'm gonna make them into some LED shapes, but still have some sort of resemblance to a two-piece headlight design in some way. I absolutely love this grille. It looks like a waterfall to me, like a very classy waterfall that you see on buildings or concrete or something like that. I kind of want to keep it, maybe make it a little darker so it doesn't stand out too much, but the main difference is going to be down here in the bumper. So with that said, let's jump in here and let's see how this GNX or Grand National is going to turn out. So when they started the development of the Grand National, they had three different design directions that were were sketched out in the 1980s, including the stripe package model that was introduced in 1982, but it wasn't until 1984 that the all-black paint scheme was revealed with the turbocharged 3.8 liter V6, which is of course the most recognizable Grand National today. The 1982 Grand National was fitted with a naturally aspirated V6, and the following year Buick gave the Regal a turbocharged powertrain, and the Regal Turbo T was born. But the most common Grand National arrived in 1984, as I said, with the all-black paint job and even more performance. And the thing with the Grand National here is that for each year, basically, I think it's basically for each year since 1984 up until 1987, the performance grew. It got more and more powerful up until 1987. So each 1984 and later Buick Grand National got a 3.8 liter turbocharged V6 with a 4-speed automatic, which early on produced 200 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque, which is not crazy, but you have to keep in mind this was after the muscle car era has died out, so the power is usually down on production cars in the US at this time period, even though the engines might have been massive still. However, that changed in 1986, the power here, thanks to a new intercooler and several internal tweaks to the engine. Output now jumped to 235 horsepower in 1986. However, the power increase didn't stop there, and by the end of production in 1987, the Grand National offered 245 horsepower, up from the beginning in 1984, from 200 to now 245 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque. And this made it possible to launch it from 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds, which is not bad for the design and the overall looks of this car. You just don't think it would be able to do that. But Buick wanted to make something even more special for the very last run of the Grand National production, and that was, of course, the 1987 Buick GNX. The 1987 GNX received further tweaks to the same 3.8 liter V6. You got a new turbocharger, a retuned ECU and fuel injection system, and a sport exhaust. And it's just one of the coolest cars of the 1980s by everything, by the performance, the design, the all-black style. I just love this car. The chassis was also stiffened, the rear suspension strengthened, and the transmission was upgraded as well. On the outside, the Buick GNX also gained new aluminum wheels and fender flares with functional cooling louvers. No fake vents here. I'm looking at you, Toyota Supra. And as a result of all of these tweaks and upgrades to the GNX, it now had, in 1987, the final production version had 267 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque, and it went 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. Now, to put that in comparison of the time period here, that is faster than the Ferrari Testarossa and the Lamborghini Countach, and it could run the quarter mile in just 13.1 seconds, and that put it in supercar territory of the 1980s. And the GNX is still fast by modern muscle car standards. Buick only made 547 GNXs in 1987. All were, of course, black. It's a rare find today, and that's partially why a recent GNX was sold for an incredible $205,000 at auction. Let's quickly talk about the redesign here and what's going on. So as I said, I wanted to keep the vibe of the coolness of the Grand National here, and not make it into a modern, soft, squishy, melted cheese, no idea what it is looking design, if that makes sense. I wanted to keep the proportions of the GNX, make it more of a resto mod with a new front fascia that is a lot more modern than, of course, the one from 1987. That's the whole point with this video. And I also found the GNX wheels here, and I love the style of these wheels, and I think they would actually look great in a on a modern car as a kind of throwback to the 80s, even though we may have to make them a little bigger, and to keep the same kind of rectangular, too squarish feeling in the headlights. I designed the LEDs in these headlights to kind of resemble that, even though now it is a solid piece of headlight. It's one unit. They're not separated anymore, but graphically they are. And this is one of these things again where graphic comes into play, and you can create so much with graphics in car design. You can even change the how you perceive the proportions of a car by using graphics, and I think that's often overlooked. The graphic part of car design is often overlooked when it comes to designing cars. If a company or a company has a problem with a car design and they try to solve it by changing the shape of the car, when in a lot of cases it can actually be solved by just being clever with some graphic design features on the car to solve that issue, and it's also going to be a lot cheaper, of course, and you're still going to have the whatever functionality you need, and all the engineers are going to be even happier because you don't have to mess around with the shape of the car. But anyway, this was a very fun redesign, very challenging. I really had no idea where I wanted to take this, and I think that shows in the redesign here as well. You can see that I go back and forth trying different things with the bumper until I find something that suits it, that looks retro but at the same time look a little more modern than, of course, the 1987 model. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Take care.